I didn't know my life would crack open in the middle of a perfectly staged living room, under string lights and polite laughter. But that's exactly where it happened. My name is Maria Chen. I'm 42 years old, and I design skyscrapers. The kind that hold tens of thousands of lives above ground and don't get the luxury of failing. I've stood through earthquakes, hostile zoning boards, and investors who think steel bends to ego. I thought I understood pressure. I was wrong, because nothing prepares you for the moment your own husband turns you into entertainment. Daniel, my husband of 6 years, stood in the center of that party, glowing the way he only ever did around his friends. He works in marketing, thrives on presentation, optics, perception. To his social circle, he was charming, magnetic, the kind of man who could sell silence as confidence. And to them, I was background, the boring wife, the serious one, the woman who didn't get it. I'd spent years showing up anyway. Years of heels I hated, dinners I didn't need, conversations where I smiled while being quietly dismissed. I told myself that marriage meant compromise, that love meant endurance, that supporting your partner sometimes meant shrinking yourself so they could shine. That night, I tried not to shrink. The music shifted, one of those early 2000s songs that made everyone scream like they'd been waiting their whole lives for it. Daniel laughed, dancing with his friends, radiant in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. So I did something reckless. I stepped forward, took his hand, smiled. "Dance with me," I said. He looked at me like I'd asked him to ruin the mood. He did it anyway, reluctant, indulgent, and for a few seconds it felt like us again, familiar, warm, my hand on his waist, his cologne, the memory of why I loved him. I leaned in to kiss him. He pulled back sharply. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, he said, "I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you." The room froze. Then it exploded. Laughter. Real laughter. Applause disguised as gasps. People clutching their stomachs, wiping tears from their eyes. My husband had just humiliated me in front of 20 people, and they loved him for it. I stood there smiling. Not because it didn't hurt, but because something inside me finally snapped into focus. And in that silence after the laughter, I realized this wasn't just a bad night. This was the truth, finally spoken out loud. I used to think love was supposed to feel like balance, like two people meeting in the middle, each bringing something the other didn't have, each softening the other's edges. For a long time, that was the story I told myself about Daniel and me. I'm Maria Chen, 42, senior structural architect at a firm that doesn't win projects by being loud. We win because our buildings stand when the world shakes. My days are numbers and load calculations, meetings with engineers who speak in calm, absolute truths. If a column is weak, you don't manifest it stronger. You redesign, you fix it. You take responsibility for what will happen if you don't. That mindset is in my bones. It's also the reason I ignored warning signs for years, because I kept treating my marriage like a project that could be reinforced if I worked harder. Daniel is 5 years younger than me, 37, and built like someone who belongs in a marketing campaign. He's handsome in a way that looks effortless, like his face was designed to be photographed. He smiles and people lean in. He speaks and people laugh, even when he hasn't said anything that funny. There's a charisma to him that makes rooms rearrange themselves around his presence. When we met, it felt like opposites finally clicking into place. It was a charity event. I hadn't wanted to go. One of my colleagues practically shoved the invite into my hand because networking matters. I remember standing near a high-top table, holding a glass of sparkling water like it was a shield, watching men in expensive suits compete over who donated more. That's when Daniel approached me. Not with the usual shallow opener. No, "What do you do?" said like a test. He looked at the architectural rendering on the screen behind the stage and said, genuinely curious, "Is that cantilevered section actually feasible, or is it just for show?" I blinked. Because for the first time that entire night, Someone wasn't treating me like furniture. I laughed, an actual laugh, and I told him it was feasible, but only if the internal bracing was designed correctly. He listened. He asked questions. He didn't interrupt. When I spoke, his eyes stayed on mine, instead of drifting to whatever was shinier in the room. And that did something to me. Quiet women like me, women who've built entire lives around competence, don't get seen romantically very often. We get respected, relied on, sometimes admired from a safe distance, but being wanted, being looked at like you're the most interesting person in the room, that's rarer than people admit. Daniel made me feel wanted. He followed up the next day with a text that wasn't clever. It was simple. I liked talking to you. Dinner this week? The first months were easy. He planned dates. He brought little gifts, not expensive, but thoughtful. A book he thought I'd like, coffee delivered to my office on a brutal deadline day. He called me grounding. He said my calm made him feel safe, and I loved that. I loved being the steady one. I didn't grow up in a house where feelings were dramatic and loud. My father was an immigrant who believed stability was love. My mother showed affection by packing fruit into my bag and insisting I wear a jacket. I learned early that the world doesn't reward emotional chaos. It rewards performance, quiet excellence, not complaining, not needing too much. So when Daniel's world started to feel heavier, more social, more image-focused, I adapted. We moved into our house after we got married. Daniel loved hosting. He loved having a living room that looked like a catalog, a kitchen island that made people say, wow. I didn't care much either way, as long as it was functional. But I let him style it, let him choose the art, let him curate the perfection. It made him happy. Then came the friends. At first, they were just present. Women with glossy hair and practiced laughs. Men with expensive watches and casual arrogance. Conversations that felt like competitions. Who traveled more? Who renovated more? Who had the best trainer? The best wine? The best life? I didn't hate them immediately. I tried to be open, but there was a tone. Subtle at first, then sharper with time. Little jokes that weren't jokes. Compliments that carried a hook. Oh, Maria, you're so serious. I could never. Do you ever just relax? Like, live a little? You're a skyscraper girl, right? That's so intense. Daniel must have the patience of a saint. They'd say it smiling, like they were including me. But I'd feel my spine stiffen anyway. Because the subtext was always the same. You don't belong here. And Daniel didn't defend me. Not directly. He'd do this thing where he'd laugh, just lightly, like the comments were harmless, like the people saying them didn't know any better. Then later, when we were alone, he'd kiss my cheek and say, "They're just loud. Don't take it personally." The first time he said that, I believed him. The 10th time, it started to feel like a warning, but I stayed. Because outside those parties, we still had a life. We still had routines. We still ate dinner together. We still shared a bed. There were mornings when he'd wrap his arms around my waist while I made coffee, and I'd let myself believe that was enough. I told myself the social stuff was just noise, and I could handle noise. I handle wind loads that could tear a building apart. So when his friends started calling me boring, I smiled. When they teased me for wearing flats, I laughed politely. When Daniel's eyes flickered with disappointment because I didn't dress up enough, I adjusted. I bought new dresses. I practiced makeup that didn't feel like me. I learned to tolerate expensive dinners where people talked about crypto like it was a religion. I kept showing up because Daniel wanted me there. And I thought marriage meant supporting your partner. I didn't see that I was supporting him by slowly erasing myself. By the time that Friday soiree happened, the one that detonated everything, I wasn't walking into a party. I was walking into the culmination of 6 years of small humiliations I'd trained myself to swallow. And the worst part, a piece of me still believed I could fix it. That if I just acted lighter, softer, more fun, Daniel would look at me the way he did at the beginning. That night, when I took his hand and asked him to dance, I wasn't being brave. I was trying to go back in time. And he made sure everyone in that room watched me fail. If I'm honest with myself, the party wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the moment the cracks became loud enough that I couldn't pretend they were cosmetic anymore. Long before that night, Daniel had started changing in ways that were easy to dismiss individually and devastating when you finally lined them up side by side. It began with tone. Not what he said, but how he said it. When I talked about work, he'd nod, distracted, scrolling on his phone. When I explained why a deadline was crushing me, he'd sigh and say things like, "You're always stressed, Maria," as if stress were a personality flaw instead of a consequence of responsibility. At parties, he stopped introducing me as his wife. I became, "Maria, she's an architect," delivered quickly, like a disclaimer. Sometimes, when his friends asked what I did, he'd answer for me. Simplify it. "She designs buildings," he'd say, glossing over years of education, licensure exams, and sleepless nights. It was never outright disrespectful, just enough to make me feel reduced. And every time I noticed it, I told myself I was being sensitive. Daniel's friends made that easy. They'd laugh and say, "Oh my God, don't be so intense," whenever I expressed an opinion that didn't align with the group's vibe. They spoke in jokes that weren't really jokes, little needles wrapped in laughter. One of them, everyone nodded approvingly. I smiled. What they meant was, "You don't challenge us." Daniel never corrected them. And slowly, imperceptibly, the dynamic shifted. He started dressing differently for parties, sharper, trendier, while side-eyeing my outfits with comments like, "You're wearing that?" said casually, like he wasn't planting doubt in my chest. He began suggesting I loosen up. "Just have fun," he'd say, as if sometimes when we argued, and they were still minor at that point, he'd end it with, "You wouldn't get it. You're not really social like that." That line stayed with me because it wasn't about socializing. The worst part was how his friends reinforced it. They'd corner me in kitchens or bathrooms and offer advice I hadn't asked for. "You know," one said once, touching my arm like we were intimate, "Daniel could have anyone. You're lucky he loves how grounded you are." Lucky. Another time, someone joked, "Opposites attract, right? He's the fun one. You're the structure." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. I didn't want to be the difficult wife. I didn't want to make Daniel choose, so I absorbed it. I told myself strength meant endurance, but endurance without dignity is just slow erosion. The subtle humiliations piled up. Daniel would interrupt me mid-sentence in group conversations. He'd tease me for being too literal. He'd tell stories about me that framed my seriousness as a flaw, always to laughs, always at my expense. And every time I tried to talk to him about it later, alone, he'd deflect. "You're overthinking. They didn't mean it like that. Why are you so defensive?" Eventually, I stopped bringing it up. That's the thing about people like Daniel. They don't silence you with force. They do it by convincing you that speaking up makes you the problem. The parties became heavier. I'd stand near snack tables, watching the room like an observer in my own marriage. I'd notice how Daniel lit up around certain people, how his voice changed, how animated he became. And I feel this quiet ache in my chest, wondering when he stopped being that way with me. Still, I showed up because marriage meant showing up, because leaving felt dramatic, because I thought love was supposed to hurt a little. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly now. Daniel wasn't cruel in private. He was careless in public, and he let his friends turn me into a prop, a contrast that made him look brighter. That night at Christina's party, all of those moments were already sitting inside me, stacked neatly like load-bearing failures, waiting for the wrong pressure. When the music changed and the laughter rose, when Daniel looked at me like I didn't belong in his world, the structure was already compromised. All it took was one sentence to bring it down. The room didn't just go quiet when Daniel said it. It tilted. You know that sensation when your body realizes something before your mind does? When the air feels heavier, your ears ring slightly and time stretches thin? That's what happened the second the words left his mouth. "I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you." For half a heartbeat, no one reacted. 20 people frozen in the same shared disbelief. I could feel Daniel's hand still hovering near my waist, not touching me anymore, like even proximity suddenly repulsed him. Then laughter detonated. Not polite laughter, not nervous laughter, real, uncontrolled laughter. Someone slapped their knee. Someone else bent forward, gasping. I heard a sharp, "Oh my God," cut through the noise, followed by more giggles. Wine sloshed dangerously close to the rim of glasses. Christina nearly dropped hers. One woman wiped tears from her eyes. They weren't laughing with us. They were laughing at me, at my expense, at the woman who had just tried, foolishly, to be affectionate with her own husband. I stood there smiling. It wasn't a choice. It was instinct. The same instinct that keeps you calm when a steel beam shifts unexpectedly, when panic would only make things worse. My face held together even as my mind scrambled to catch up. Did he really just say that? In front of everyone? About me? My heart wasn't racing. It was oddly steady, like it had slipped into some kind of emergency protocol. I could feel my fingers pressing into the fabric of his shirt, could smell his cologne, suddenly cloying and wrong. Daniel didn't apologize. He didn't even look embarrassed. He looked pleased, like he'd delivered a perfect punchline and was soaking in the reaction. That's when something inside me snapped into clarity. Not rage, not hysteria, precision. I took a breath, a slow one. Let the laughter crest and begin to wobble. Timing matters in moments like this. You don't react too quickly. That makes you look wounded. You don't wait too long. That makes you look weak. I looked directly at him, really looked. At the man I'd defended for years. At the man who had watched his friends chip away at me and done nothing. At the man who had just publicly humiliated me and called it humor. I kept my smile soft. "That's fair," I said calmly. The laughter stuttered. People weren't expecting anything from me. I was supposed to shrink, flush, excuse myself, cry in a bathroom. I paused just long enough for the room to lean in. At least the dog wags his tail when he sees me. Silence dropped, like a glass shattering midair. Someone inhaled sharply. A wine glass froze halfway to someone's lips. Across the room, one of the husbands turned his face away, shoulders shaking, not laughing loudly, but trying not to. Another man muttered under his breath, "Damn." Daniel's expression flickered, just for a second. Surprise! Then, irritation. But I wasn't finished. I'd spent years studying these people without realizing it. How they operated, how they fed on imbalance, how they expected me to play my role. One response could be written off as luck. I needed to make it undeniable. I took a casual sip of my drink, like we were discussing the weather. And now that I think about it, I added, still conversational, the dog doesn't fake headaches either. The room exploded. This time, it wasn't clean laughter. It was chaos. People choked on drinks. Someone swore out loud. A man bent over, hands on his knees, laughing so hard no sound came out. One glass actually slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor, but no one noticed. The wives looked scandalized. The husbands looked liberated. One caught my eye and lifted his beer in a silent salute. Daniel's face went through colors I didn't know skin could reach. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitching. He looked like he wanted to say something, anything, but couldn't find a response that wouldn't make it worse. Christina tried to step in, flustered, but I lifted my glass slightly. "To honesty," I said lightly. "Seems like it's been in short supply." This time, the laughter wasn't at me. For the first time in years, it wasn't at my expense. Daniel snapped. "We're leaving," he announced sharply. "Sounds good," I replied, unbothered. "I've got an early morning. Buildings don't design themselves." As we walked out, whispers erupted behind us. I could feel eyes burning into my back. That party had just become a story, one they'd tell and retell, reshaping it over time. But the truth was simple. The boring wife had spoken, and the room didn't know what to do with that. The walk to the car felt longer than it should have. Daniel's my heels, clicked sharply against the concrete driveway. each step precise and angry, like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence he hadn't finished yelling yet. He yanked the passenger door open and slammed it hard enough that the frame rattled. The sound echoed through the quiet street. I didn't rush. I never rush when I'm trying not to fall apart. I got into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirror, buckled my seatbelt. Ordinary motions, muscle memory. My heart wasn't racing. That was the strangest part. It felt like something inside me had gone very still, very centered, like the calm after you finally stop arguing with gravity. The silence in the car was aggressive, thick, weaponized. I could hear everything. The hum of the engine, the whisper of the air conditioning, the faint buzz of the radio I hadn't turned off. Some old song about not backing down drifted through the speakers, and I almost laughed at the irony. Halfway home, Daniel broke. "You embarrassed me," which he hissed, low and venomous, like he didn't want the car itself to hear him. I kept my eyes on the road. "Oh," I said pleasantly. "I thought you started that game." His head snapped toward me. I didn't look back. "You made me look bad in front of my friends," he continued, voice rising. "Do you have any idea how that looked?" I signaled, turned onto our street, pulled into the driveway. The motion sensor light flicked on, bathing the house in a sterile glow. I put the car in park, turned off the engine, sat there for a beat with my hands resting on the steering wheel. Then I turned to face him. "Really?" I asked quietly. He opened his mouth, already mid-argument, but I didn't let him build momentum. "Your friends laughed harder when you insulted me than they did when Dean announced his vasectomy last 4th of July, I said evenly. "Remember the silence right after you said it? They weren't uncomfortable. They were entertained." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. "They loved it," I continued, unbuckling my seatbelt. "So explain something to me. How exactly did I make you look bad when you publicly turned me into the punchline first?" He stared at me like I'd spoken a language he didn't understand. I stepped out of the car, closed my door normally, not slamming it, not dramatizing anything, and walked toward the house. Our golden retriever Max greeted me with his whole body wagging, nails clicking against the floor, tail thumping like he'd been waiting all night. "Hey, buddy," I murmured, kneeling to let him lick my face. At least someone's happy to see me. Behind me, Daniel stormed past, up the stairs, the bedroom door slamming so hard it rattled the framed photos on the wall. Max looked up at me, ears perked, confused by the tension. "Don't worry," I told him softly. "Just human nonsense." I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settled onto the couch, and turned on a late-night baseball game. Max jumped up beside me, head heavy and warm on my lap. Loyal, simple, honest. Upstairs, I could hear Daniel pacing, drawers opening, his phone buzzing nonstop, rage texting, no doubt, already crafting the version of the story where he was the victim. I didn't care. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. Not because everything was fine, but because I'd finally stopped apologizing for existing. The next morning, I woke to Max's tongue on my cheek and the smell of nothing. No coffee, no breakfast, no sounds of Daniel's usual routine, just silence. My phone said 8:47 a.m. Saturday. A notification popped up, a message from Dean. "You're a legend. The group chat is losing its mind." I smiled. "What group chat?" I typed. "The wives' group chat. She left her phone unlocked. I've got screenshots. Want them?" I stared at the screen for a moment. Did I want them? I replied with a simple yes. And as I waited, coffee brewing in the background, I felt something shift again. Not outward this time, but inward. Because for the first time, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was ready to see the truth. Dean didn't disappoint. My phone buzzed again, then again, screenshots arriving in a rapid-fire stream. I sat at the kitchen table, Max curled at my feet, coffee cooling untouched as I scrolled. The group chat name alone told me everything. Wine Queens. The messages started 15 minutes after we'd left the party. Christina. Okay, can we talk about what just happened? Amanda. Logan actually said that out loud. Rachel. The dog comment. I literally can't. Then Daniel entered the chat. Daniel. I can't believe Maria embarrassed me like that in front of everyone. I'm mortified. There it was. Not what I said was wrong. Not I went too far. Just humiliation. His. What surprised me wasn't his message. It was the silence that followed. 3 full minutes. Dead air. I could almost see them typing, deleting, recalibrating. Finally, Christina, you did say the dog thing first. He was responding. I exhaled slowly. Daniel, I was joking. Everyone knows that. She took it seriously and made it a whole thing. Amanda, was it a joke though? Because it didn't sound like one. It sounded kind of mean. I blinked. Amanda, quiet Amanda, going off script. Daniel, whose side are you on? Amanda, I'm not on sides. I'm just saying if you roast your spouse in public, you can't be shocked when they roast you back. That's just math. My lips curved despite myself. Rachel, he did get you pretty good with the headache comment. Dean was laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. Dean had warned me, he laughed. Seeing it documented was something else. Okay, but he went too far. Making those kinds of jokes about your spouse in public is disrespectful. Then a name I didn't recognize, Beth, typed out both of my lines, word for word. Reactions exploded. Laugh emojis. So many of them. Daniel, this isn't funny. He made me look like a terrible husband. Christina, the headache thing is kind of accurate though. Remember last month when you told us? Silence again. Then, Lauren, bottom line, Maria was out of line. Daniel was being playful. She took it dark. She owes him an apology. Amanda, does she though? She was publicly compared to a dog. How is that playful? I felt my chest tighten, not with pain, but with something closer to relief. For years, I'd thought I was alone in what I saw. I wasn't. Beth, if I said that to my husband in public, he'd divorce me. Just saying. Christina, let's all calm down. It was a weird night. They didn't calm down. The chat fractured, neatly, visibly. Team Daniel, Team Reality. A handful of neutrals desperately trying not to be noticed. Then came the message that made me laugh out loud. Nicole, 1:34 a.m. Honestly, I think Maria's hot now. The confidence, the timing, that was iconic. 3 laugh reactions. Daniel, are you serious right now? Nicole, I'm just saying, quiet people who finally stop taking it are always the most interesting. You've been taking her for granted. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. I actually snorted coffee. Dean sent one last message. Half of them think you're a hero. Christina's talking about uninviting people from her birthday because she doesn't want drama. You broke the group. I set my phone down. Upstairs. Footsteps. The bedroom door opened. Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs, hair messy, eyes red, wearing the same pajamas he'd slept in. He looked down at me like he was reassessing a stranger. We need to talk, he said. Sure, I replied calmly. What's up? Don't what's up me, he snapped. You humiliated me, and now my friends are... He stopped himself, realizing he was about to admit they weren't fully on his side. Are what? I asked. His eyes narrowed. You need to apologize. You need to fix this. I met his gaze steadily. Oh, I fixed it, I said. I fixed me. Shock crossed his face, then anger, then disbelief. I stood, clipped Max's leash on, and moved toward the door. I'm taking Max for a walk, I added. You can use that time to decide whether you want an actual conversation about our marriage or whether you want to keep playing the victim. Your choice. Behind me, he made a sound, half sob, half scream. I didn't turn around. The walk lasted an hour. By the time I came back, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and 6 pages of notes laid out like a presentation. I've been thinking, he announced. No good morning, no can we talk, just strategy. And in that moment, I understood something with devastating clarity. This wasn't about love. This was about control, and he was about to escalate. Daniel didn't look like my husband sitting at that table. He looked like a crisis manager. 6 pages of notes, bullet points, timelines, optics. He had diagrams, actual diagrams, mapping out social damage control. a dinner, joint apologies, a united front. He spoke in the same polished cadence he used at work when a campaign went sideways. "We invite everyone back," he said, tapping the paper with a pen. "We apologize together. We show maturity. We move on." I listened quietly, my body still, my mind drifting somewhere far away, someplace heavy and cold. "Together?" I asked finally. "Yes," he said, relieved I hadn't interrupted sooner. "You apologize for your comments. I'll apologize for how things came across. We present a team. That's how we fix this." Fix this. Not us, not the years of erosion, just the narrative. I stared at him and felt something sink in my chest. Not anger, not shock, but grief. This was the lowest point. Not the insult, not the laughter, not even the humiliation. This, the realization that the man I married cared more about being admired than being kind. That he was willing to sacrifice my dignity, again, if it meant preserving his image. "Daniel," I said slowly, choosing each word with care. "You compared kissing me to kissing a dog in front of 20 people. He flinched. It was a joke. "No," I said, quietly but firmly. It was contempt. He stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. "You're being impossible." "I'm being honest." "There's a difference?" he snapped. "Yes," I replied. "You just don't like it." He grabbed his phone, fingers flying. "I'm texting Christina. We're doing the dinner Friday night. You can show up and support me, or prove to everyone that you're exactly as difficult as they're starting to think." I nodded. "I'll be there." He paused, suspicious, but too focused on damage control to question it. That week felt surreal. Daniel planned the dinner like a state event. Caterers, formal invitations, lighting adjustments, curated music. Wedding photos repositioned strategically. He bought a new outfit, spent hours rehearsing what he'd say. Meanwhile, I went to work, walked Max, slept, ate. And one afternoon, I made a quiet stop at a pet store. The woman at the counter, mid-50s, kind eyes, name tag reading Ruth, raised an eyebrow at my purchase. "This is either going to be very funny," she said, ringing me up, "or very bad." "Probably both," I replied. Friday arrived. Our house looked flawless, magazine perfect. Daniel reminded me twice while getting ready. "We're a team tonight. No more drama." "Got it," I said, buttoning my shirt. Total team player. Guests arrived. Forced smiles. Overly polite compliments. Christina and Dean, Amanda, Rachel. Nicole, who gave me a knowing look that made Daniel's eye twitch. Dinner began. Small talk. Neutral topics. No one mentioned last week. Halfway through the main course, Daniel stood and tapped his wine glass. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," he began. "Last week was rough for us. We both said things we regret. But we've talked, and we're stronger than one bad night." He turned to me. My cue. I stood. I smiled. And instead of apologizing, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped box. "I got Daniel a gift," I said. "Something that really captures how he feels about me." The room leaned in. Daniel's eyes lit up, hopeful, expectant. "Open it," I encouraged. He unwrapped it slowly, lifted the lid. Inside was a bright red dog chew toy, bone-shaped, squeaky, with a tag that read, "For when you miss my lips." The room went dead silent. Then chaos. Laughter exploded from every direction. Dean nearly fell out of his chair. Amanda hid her face behind her napkin. Nicole cackled openly, tears streaming. Daniel stood frozen, color draining from his face, holding the toy like it might burn him. "Maria," Christina said weakly, trying diplomacy while failing not to laugh. I thought it was thoughtful," I said innocently. He told everyone he'd rather kiss the dog. Right on cue, Max came bounding in, tail wagging furiously, eyes locked on the squeaky toy. "See," I added. "He approves." The squeak echoed as the toy slipped from Daniel's fingers. "Get out," he whispered. What? I asked. Get out, he screamed, throwing the toy at me. It bounced off my chest with a loud squeak. Max lunged for it, thinking we were playing. The room lost it completely. I set the toy gently on the table in front of Daniel. I'll leave this here, I said calmly, in case you need it later. I turned to the room. Thank you all for coming. Sorry to disrupt the Unity dinner. Early morning tomorrow. I grabbed my jacket, whistled for Max, and walked out. Behind me, shouting, laughter, someone saying, "Best dinner party ever." In the truck, engine running, Max panting happily beside me, I felt something profound. Emptiness. Not the hollow kind, the peaceful kind, because I'd reached the bottom and there was nowhere left to fall. I didn't go home that night. I drove through quiet streets with Max's head resting against my thigh, his breathing steady, uncomplicated. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I didn't replay the dinner over and over like I used to replay arguments in my head. I felt done. I stayed at a friend's place, someone who didn't ask questions, didn't offer opinions, just handed me a beer and pointed me toward a clean guest room. Real kindness. No performance. My phone, on the other hand, was chaos. Missed calls, voicemails, text stacking on top of each other like a tower threatening to collapse. I listened to exactly one voicemail. "Maria, you need to come home right now," Daniel's voice said, sharp and frantic. "You humiliated me again. My reputation is ruined. Christina's getting calls asking if we're getting divorced. Lauren unfollowed me on Instagram. Do you have any idea how serious that is?" Instagram. Not us, not what he'd said, not what he'd done. That was the moment the fog lifted completely. Another voicemail followed, angrier. "You think you're funny? You're cruel. You're making me look like the bad guy when all I did was make one little comment." One little comment. That's how he reframed it. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, the room quiet except for Max shifting in his sleep. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself, to soften, to fix. I realized something terrifying and liberating all at once. If I apologized now, I would be apologizing for having a spine. The next morning, I sent one text. "I'll come by this afternoon to get some things. We need to talk." His reply came instantly. "You need to come home now and fix this." There was nothing left to fix. When I pulled into the driveway later that day, Daniel was pacing inside like a caged animal. The moment I stepped through the door, he was on me. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "Do you know how worried I was?" "You were worried about optics," I said calmly. "You made me look like an idiot. Everyone is taking sides. Amanda texted saying maybe we need space. Amanda, Maria, my friend of 10 years. I waited for him to finish. "What did you expect me to do?" I asked quietly. "Smile and take it? Pretend it was nothing?" "It was a joke," he snapped. "No," I said. "You meant it, and you've been meaning it for years." He stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm done," I said. The words landed softly, but they were solid. Done apologizing for being boring. Done being your punchline. Done shrinking so you can feel big. His face drained of color. "You're not serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." "You're throwing away our marriage because your feelings got hurt?" I shook my head. "I'm ending a marriage that's been dead for a long time because I finally realized love isn't supposed to feel like drowning." Tears streaked down his face, messy, dramatic. But something about them felt hollow, performative. "So that's it," he said. "You're choosing yourself?" "Yes," I replied, for the first time. I told him I'd come back for my clothes, my tools, and Max. "You're taking the dog?" he asked, stunned. "You said you'd rather kiss him than me," I answered calmly. "I think you'll be happier with someone you actually want around." He had no response. At the door, I paused. "For what it's worth," I said quietly, "I did love you. Past tense. But this version of you, the one who treats her partner like a prop, I don't even like her." I left. And as I drove away, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt light. like I'd finally put something heavy down. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It rolled in slowly, inevitably, like a tide Daniel had always assumed would obey him. I moved out within the week. He wanted the house, said it made more sense because of logistics. I didn't argue. I took my clothes, my work equipment, my personal files, and Max. The rest was just furniture and memories that didn't belong to me anymore. The divorce paperwork followed faster than I expected, not because he was eager to let go, but because he needed control back. He framed it as mutual, as a conscious uncoupling, using language that sounded polished enough to pass in his social circle. But the cracks showed almost immediately. His friends noticed. At first, they performed loyalty loudly. Social media posts about knowing your worth. Stories about strong men who don't apologize for confidence. Carefully worded captions that never mentioned my name but pointed in my direction. But something had changed. People had seen him. They'd seen the insult. They'd seen the laughter. They'd seen me stand my ground without screaming, crying, or begging. That mattered. Christina stopped inviting certain people to group events because they made things awkward. Translation? They didn't automatically side with Daniel anymore. Amanda pulled back first. Subtle, polite, but unmistakable. Nicole didn't even pretend. She stayed friendly with me openly, which irritated Daniel more than any argument ever had. The husbands were worse. They didn't confront him. They didn't need to. They just respected me. I'd see it in passing. Raised eyebrows, nods, quiet comments like, "That took guts," or "Good for you." The kind of acknowledgement Daniel thrived on, but was no longer receiving. And then his circle began to thin. Invitations slowed. Group dinners turned into smaller gatherings. People stopped asking him to host. He blamed busy schedules, but I knew better. Image-based relationships don't survive truth very well. Meanwhile, Daniel's family, who had always been politely distant with me, surprised everyone. His sister called me, not to take sides, to say quietly, "I'm sorry, I should have said something sooner." That sentence alone told me everything. Daniel tried once more to control the narrative. He suggested mediation, not to reconcile, but to align our messaging. He wanted consistency, neutral language, no surprises. I declined. I didn't badmouth him. I didn't post cryptic quotes. I simply lived my life. And that turned out to be the most damaging thing I could have done. Because without me absorbing the tension, without me smoothing the edges, Daniel had nothing to push against. His charm still worked, but only on the surface. Underneath, people remembered. They remembered the dog comment. They remembered the dinner. They remembered how easy it had been for him to humiliate someone he claimed to love. And once that image cracks, it doesn't reseal. The final blow came quietly. A mutual acquaintance, someone Daniel respected, mentioned over coffee, "You know, Maria handled that whole thing with a lot of grace. Not you were right, not she overreacted, just grace." Daniel never brought me up again after that. And I knew, without needing confirmation, that the story he'd been telling himself, that I was the problem, was no longer holding up. The truth had finished its work. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. I was already gone. 6 months later, my life looked quieter, and that was the point. My apartment wasn't large or styled for photos. 2 bedrooms, neutral walls, furniture chosen for comfort, not approval. Max claimed the couch immediately, shedding like it was his full-time job. The place smelled like coffee in the mornings and clean laundry at night. No tension, no performance, no rehearsing conversations in my head before speaking. Just peace. Work flourished in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant emotional drag, my focus sharpened. I stopped second-guessing myself. I spoke more directly in meetings. I trusted my instincts again. A promotion came with a salary bump big enough that legal fees felt insignificant, almost symbolic. Funny how confidence returns when it's no longer being siphoned away. I bought a truck Daniel used to veto because it wasn't on brand. Drove it out of the city on weekends, took Max hiking, let silence exist without trying to fill it. And then Without trying, I met someone. Not a whirlwind, not fireworks, just easy. We met at the dog park. He worked with animals, steady, honest, unpretentious. We talked about nothing important and everything real. No games, no posturing, no need to prove anything. When he asked about my past, I didn't launch into a monologue. I just said, I learned the difference between patience and self-erasure. He understood. That was enough. Occasionally, I still see Daniel's old circle around town. They avoid eye contact, not out of fear, out of discomfort. I don't engage. I don't need closure from people who benefited from my silence. I smile, walk on, live well. Because here's the lesson I learned too late, but fully. Love doesn't require you to be smaller. Respect isn't loud, but it is consistent. And the moment someone laughs at your dignity, they've already told you who they are. I didn't lose my marriage that night. I lost the illusion that endurance equals loyalty. And in exchange, I gained something far more valuable. Myself, Max agrees.